Hello, good people of YouTube, Mountbatten here, and today we have some news about some big changes to ASW and subs in general. And this should come as no surprise, as of course submarines are still in testing, so naturally they're going to swing back and forth in terms of balancing. And this is a change that I did think was needed, and I've talked about this beforehand, but let's go ahead and get into what they are in fact changing. So, dev blog will be in the link down below if you wish to read along as I read aloud. It says, Point 11.0 Public Test Changes to ASW Armament and Submarines. Balance changes to depth charges, depth charge airstrike, and submarines. Details of changes. Submarines have been fighting on equal terms with ships of other types in random battles for 2 months already, and today we'd like to tell you about the changes that will happen to the new ship type and update Point 11.0. These changes are very important as they affect different areas of interaction with submarines and bring them to balance with other ship types. Also considering the changes that happened to submarines in 10.10, which are described here, they link to a previous dev blog. We are announcing these changes already since they will appear in the first stage of public testing for the upcoming update this week. However, we will definitely come back with a detailed review of the current state of submarines and the reasons for the changes made, as well as the details on further plans for testing. So here they go, we've got some bullet points here. In spite of their large area of effect, airstrike's depth charges sometimes fail to deal damage to submarines even with the correct lead. Since there was a large distance between the depth charges and their individual areas of damage were small, in order to guarantee dealing damage to submarines when giving the correct lead, while at the same time keeping the effectiveness of the armament at the same level, we increased the area of damage and the maximum damage of these aerial depth charges, but the number of charges per plane and size of the squadron was reduced. Thus, hitting a submarine will become more difficult, but a successful hit will guarantee high damage. In order for the depth charge airstrike to affect the behavior of submarines more, even when the drop is not the most accurate, we added a 50% chance of sonar incapacitation by an aerial depth charge. Submarines are usually quite close to enemy ships, however their current HP is too low for effective interaction at such distances. In order to increase the submarine's survivability, we increased the HP pool. Respectively, we increased the damage of depth charges from cruisers and destroyers to keep the interaction with the submarines at the same level. We increased the duration of the twice-pinged sector, which gives submarines more time to plan the attack and choose a more comfortable position and moment to launch the torpedoes. Considering the latest changes to the detection mechanics of submarines and a significant limitation of visibility of enemy ships underwater, the surveillance radar consumable, taking into account its high detection range, started to significantly affect the gameplay of submarines. During the active phase of their attack, forcing them to change position and submerge to operating in maximum depth, and therefore increase the depletion of dive capacity, in order to give submarines more opportunities for maneuvering and choosing a comfortable position, as well as reducing the influence of radar on their gameplay, we removed the detection of submarines by the surveillance radar at periscope depth. Okay, before we get into the detailed changes here, so overall, I think these changes are for the better. Let's go through their explanations here. So the big change, of course, the change to the airstrike consumable, and they do have the detailed stats here. We'll get to that in a moment. I do believe that definitely what they say is very much what we're seeing in game. The depth charge planes, they come in, they drop a lot of depth charges, but it's over a very large area, and the blast radius really wasn't too much. So the submarine could easily dodge these aerial drop depth charges and be relatively okay. Now, it did, of course, force you to submerge and start to maneuver and break off your attack and all, but in order to really kill the submarine with the aerial depth charge, you really had to basically drop it right on top of him, and then that submarine wouldn't, like, it could not maneuver at all. And if they just either dove or gunned it forward or backwards, they could have easily dodged the aerial depth charges. But, and at least when I have done this with submarines, it seems that they are okay with sitting completely still and just eating the depth charges. But a submarine player that's on the move is a very difficult thing to deal with these charges. So now this rewards you, like they say, for predicting the lead correctly by getting high damage off of these depth charges. So naturally they can't double the amount of damage the depth charges are doing and allow you to have the same amount of depth charges, because then you'll just be utterly nuking submarines off the face of the map. So I think it's a good change. It rewards you for being correct in your prediction of the submarine's movement and such, and once players get a hold of this, they can really just keep dunking on submarines like this. So I think that's good overall. The sonar incapacitation, I didn't even know the sonar could get incapacitated. It's happened to me one time in all the submarine matches I've played. So having your sonar, which is your ping, get incapacitated is a big deal, because now you can't shoot homing torpedoes. So I do like that change. The HP buff to submarines, and just judging by the numbers they're showing us here, it's about a 5 to 4,500 HP buff per sub, which I think was needed, because after they nerfed the damage on submarines, like, again, I understand that a large part of the player base just hates submarines, and they're going to see this increase in health as, sacrosanct, or not sacrosanct, sacrilegious, I should say. It was needed, because their damage has to have absolutely just dropped out completely because of the changes, which again were good changes. But beforehand they were super glass cannons because they could do an insane amount of damage, but literally one good salvo from a heavy cruiser could, and still can, murder a submarine. It's not like they're increasing their HP to like 25,000 or anything like that. They're still quite pitiful for their tier. So I think that is a good change. Now, what was the other change? Duration of the twice pinged sector, I don't really see a problem with that. I'm not sure why they're doing it, because once you get the ping on the target, well, even in the current state now, it's not hard to double ping the target, then launch your torpedoes and have them go after the target. So, a little bit of a buff there. Surveillance radar, I agree with this change. It's kind of silly how when the entirety of your ship is below the surface and only your periscope's poking up, radar can still spot you. That was kind of silly in my opinion beforehand, but yeah, it makes sense now that it can only spot you when your submarine is surface. I mean, there's nothing for the radar to bounce off of except for a little stick in the water with the periscope is raised, and definitely when you're below the surface, there's nothing for the sonar for the radar to bounce off of, because you're below the surface. So that makes sense there. All right, so the detailed changes now. So changes to the ASW armament, change the parameters of depth charge airstrikes for all ships. Number of planes in the attack flight reduced from 2 to 1. Number of depth charges per plane reduced by half. Depth charge damage increased twofold, so they double the damage. Now the depth charges have a 50% chance of incapacitating the sonar of a submarine for 30 seconds. Depth charge area damage to submarines was increased by 25%. That's something important to note too. Not only did they double the damage, they're increasing the blast radius by quite a ways for these depth charges too. So now you're doing double the damage over a quarter larger area than what you were beforehand. So yeah, the damage in the area of damage will more gradually reduce the further from the explosion submarine is. The furthest 20% of the area will not deal damage but can still incapacitate. So if you're diving and you're maneuvering, the further away you are from the blast, less damage you're going to take. When you're in the exterior 20%, you are only going to get incapacitations and not damaged. Change the parameters of depth charges, armament for destroyers and cruisers. Maximum depth charge damage increased by 40%. So overall, I'd say this is a pretty big buff to ASW in general. A massive buff to ship launch depth charges, definitely. Because, yeah, ship launch depth charges, DDs and heavy cruisers and light cruisers that have depth charges, they normally drop a lot more depth charges, and you can drop those suckers literally right on top of the submarine too. So these are extra spooky now with that increased damage there. And in terms of the HP increase of submarines, so the Cachalot's going from 9,900 HP to 14,000, the Salmon from 12,500 to 17,800, Balau from 14,300 to 20,200, U-69 from 8,300 to 11,500, U-190 from 9,900 to 15,400, and U-2501 from 13,400 to 18,900. So, like I said, about 5,000 and a half damage, hit pool buffs to these submarines. Again, these numbers are still all within 1 or 2 shots of most cruisers, definitely within one shot of most battleships at the submarines tier, so they're still definitely on the low end, but again, a buff was needed to their health because, well, and think about this too. Every time you see a submarine in game and it gets spotted, think about the amount of planes that are instantly dropped on it. Like, it's insane. You see like 8 ASW charges get popped off at once on one submarine. And now these charges are doing double the damage over a larger area. Granted, you have less charges now and less planes and less depth charges, but they're doing double the damage. So you can imagine why this was needed in terms of game balance. So I can understand why they're doing this, and we'll see how this goes. So the double ping sector, Cachalot, Salmon, Balau, is going from 30 seconds to a 90-second runtime. The Germans are going from a 25 to a 75-second runtime. Reduce the maximum depth for tier 8 and 10 submarines. Oh, the concealment and visibility parameters were changed accordingly. Oh, this is another nerf. Tier 8 submarines from 60 to 50 meters. That's now their maximum depth. Tier 10 submarines from 80 to 60. Submarines can no longer be taken by surveillance radar. Yeah, at the periscope depth. So, yeah, that's a pretty big nerf. Now you can't go down as deep. They don't mention if they change the damage at that depth, because the deeper you are in submarines, the less damage you take from depth charges and ASW equipment. So if they don't change that, then that means you are going to be doing a significantly larger amount of damage to these submarines, because that shallower depth, and the shallower they are, the more damage they take from depth charges and such. So yeah, they didn't mention that at all in the first half of the dev blog. So yeah, big changes coming to ASW. Overall, I would say it's a pretty darn big buff to ASW and a decent buff to submarines. Some changes that I think definitely were needed with the slight increase to their health, and then the ability to not be spotted by radar when you're at periscope depth. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this in the comments down below. I'm sure this will be a very active comment section. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 35,000 subs. Just past 31,400 a few days ago. And I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.